Hello, Paso. Welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where we share the fun of the big questions with you. My name is Kim Diaz, and I teach philosophy here at EPCC.
And my name is Jules Simon. I'm a philosopher at the University of Texas, El Paso.
Today our guest is Professor Antonio Castro H. He teaches graphic design and illustration at the University of Texas at El Paso, where he is a professor in the Department of Art. His experience covers a wide range of design expertise, including book design, packaging, graphic identity, posters, and illustration. Prior to teaching, he was a designer with MithoffBurton Inc. in El Paso, Texas, and later a senior designer, art director at Parham Santana Design in New York City. Antonio's work has received numerous awards and have been exhibited around the world, such as in Bolivia, Mexico, Moscow, and Warsaw, to name a few. He is a co-founder and co-organizer of Posters Without Borders, an invitational poster exhibition featuring work from internationally recognized designers. To view our guest's bio, please visit EPCC TV's YouTube channel and Antonio Castro H at Instagram. So, Professor Castro, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You are a visual designer, and so we're having philosophical dialogue about beauty, aesthetics. From your perspective in your field, how would you define beauty? What is beautiful?
It's quite complicated, right? Like it's beauty is that stimulates, in a pleasant way, our senses through music, through flavor, through sound, it's etc. But that is kind of like the easy way of answering what beauty is, right? Like it's because obviously what is beautiful to you or to you perhaps is not beautiful to me, right? Like it's I think like in broad terms, I think that we could agree that beauty can be appreciated. Let's say like we have like beautiful sunsets in our region. I think like most people would be able to agree that they are quite gorgeous, right? I mean, but not necessarily, right? Like what happens if someone experiences a pretty bad deed in their lives and it happened when one of those beautiful sunsets was occurring? Like to them it might not be as beautiful as it is to me, and that's where I guess like the critique of judgment, like Kant comes in handy, right? Like it's when he's talking about the sublime, right? Like it's that landscape, that piece of art in particular doesn't have the quality of being beautiful. I mean, like it's just our perception of that. Like it's how we react to that.
But yet, there must be enough consensus, right? So you have won numerous awards. Your designs have been exhibited all over the world, and so then you get a group of judges or experts. And so on one hand, it's subjective, but yet there must be some sense of being objective, or because then these judges together agree that this poster deserves to win an award and not that one. So if it was subjective, a friend of mine used to like the smell of gasoline. Not my favorite smell by any means, but she used to also like the smell of skunks because it reminded her of her. She grew up in Delaware, and that reminded her of, skunks were there. It
smells a little bit like coffee also, skunks.
So, not my favorite smell, right? But for some people it may be beautiful. So it's in the eye of the beholder and at one level, and yet we need to have some consensus in order for someone to win first prize, right? So how do we do that?
Let me amplify this a bit, since you mentioned Kant's critique of judgment. You did this, Antonio.
Sorry. I don't want to get too deep into that.
No, it's one of my favorite books, actually. I've taught that book 3 times separately.
It's going to become philosophic monologue of La Frontera now.
No, it's not. So, but what I think Kim was getting at was that, and this is the way Kant deals with it, is that there's an objectivity to what we consider beautiful.
Yes.
And so when I say that, that's a beautiful elephant there, when I say that, it's an act of judgment, and I expect you to agree with me. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
Right? So we say, that's beautiful, with the expectation that there's going to be consensus, right?
Yeah.
Because this is something then that brings us in all our subjectivities onto the same page and sitting at the same table. So going along those lines, what is it then that makes it objectively beautiful? Why can we agree on something that it's beautiful, right?
Well, I can break it in two ways. For instance, like this is something that I always tell my students. As a designer, as an illustrator, if you grant your client whatever it is that they're asking you for, and you don't challenge that notion or that knowledge, then I don't think you're doing your job. Because then you're just becoming their hands. So as a visual person, as a thinker, I think that you have to challenge that and then be able to convince them that your vision, because you are supposed to be an expert, it's the way to go. Whenever I present an assignment, let's say to my students, and I have to do a critique. That's how we evaluate work. I mean, we don't have tests per se. I mean, they work on something, they bring it over, and then a group of students and myself, we talk about the work. So there are some questions that we ask, and this is where, and it's one of the questions that you had presented to me before, about aesthetics, right? And I think aesthetics, it's what composes something that is beautiful, right? And the questions that I ask, not only myself, but I have students ask themselves, is the piece well thought out? Is it well conceived? I mean, is the concept sound?
Oh, nice, yeah.
Does it meet the parameters that I presented at the beginning of the assignment? Then, is it well crafted? Which also we're going to be talking about that, right? And finally, is it beautiful, right? But I think that's the last question. One thing that I always try to tell my students when they go, oh, I like it. Well, it doesn't really matter if you like it or not. Does it solve the problem? There's a ton of music that I absolutely despised, but that doesn't mean that it moves someone else to tears, right? So I think then we would be getting into issues of culture, right? It's not necessarily beauty, but it's the same thing.
But given the nature of graphic design, though, because you're a graphic designer, right?
Yes.
So given the nature of that, there is this element that's necessarily consumer or audience or spectator heavy.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you would definitely have to, the designed project, right, whatever is being designed, has to meet this kind of criteria.
Correct.
That it's going to be well thought out, right? It's going to meet the objective of whoever, is paying the dollars for it, right?
Exactly.
That kind of thing. But additionally, the aesthetic part of it is, in what way does it move the senses? And it's this balance of moving the senses, which is kind of a viscerally aesthetic, attractive thing, right? That is balanced with the well thought, and then the whatever this big idea is, right?
If it is well thought out, and if it's well made, it
Right.
should have a narrative.
Yeah.
And that narrative is what's going to convince them. You're going to be able to give them ammunition so that when they are talking about, if you convince them, if you did your job, if you did your homework, you're going to be able to give them ways of justifying why is it that they love their design
Right.
that they bought, right? Like it's you're right. I mean, like it's if I take my phone, right? Like it's in order for it to be a good design, it needs to feel good in my hand.
Yeah, it's the aesthetic part.
It needs to look good in my hand, and it needs to serve a purpose.
Right.
Like it's and it does all three, in my opinion, significantly fine, right? Like it's and that's it. Like I mean, that's how I feel like you make that judgment at the end in our field.
No, I think that's
like
great.
that.
Oh, that's really good. I'm glad that you not only went to one of our favorite places, the philosophical canon, right?
Yeah.
But you drew on your own teaching experience, what you're telling your students to do, and I think that element of not just having a narrative, but what you said a few minutes ago about, is it beautiful as the last sort of criterion, right? As a set of criteria, right? Is it beautiful? That kind of draws it all together. That word, that judgment word, that serves in our culture.
Exactly.
To signify, a certain kind of objective attractiveness, that's going to work.
And it's complicated because, like I always say, like it's it needs to, whatever you do in our field, because we are providing a service.
Right.
It needs to be both smart and beautiful.
Yeah.
If it's just smart, you're in the wrong field. If it's just beautiful, you're in the wrong field. It needs to be that perfect combination between the two.
Yeah. Yeah, because the consumer or customer, if given you're producing something commercially,
Yeah.
there has to be something that people are going to come back to. They're going to keep coming back to that image, right?
There's a bunch of examples, but for instance, like a number of years ago, Tropicana, the juice, they came out with this beautiful package that even the lid was in the shape of an orange. To the touch was beautiful, to sight was beautiful. Like the typography that they were using on the side panels, it was on its side. And that was like quite radical for a product as commercial as that. I'm sure the designers that worked on that package were extremely proud. Well, that box was on the shelves for a month because people no longer recognized Tropicana. They thought that they had shut down, they were no longer in business, and this was a new thing that was actually taking on the name of Tropicana, but it wasn't the real thing. So they canceled that package, and they went back to what they had, and that's exactly what they're using right now.
This is interesting, because this is interesting. So I'm going to refer to another, and whose work you might know, another philosopher who addresses this kind of an issue, and his name's Walter Benjamin.
Okay,
you've heard of Benjamin, right? And when he talks about works of art, he talks about it in terms of aura, right? And so the original Tropicana had this aura about it, right?
Yeah.
And in order to kind of replicate that, the project was, to create something that is, can capture that original aura, like the original painting, right? But then multiply it.
Yeah.
Right? But that doesn't always work.
Exactly.
Right? Doesn't always work. And not only that, just in terms of this kind of,
well, if it brings the brand.
If it's going to make money, right? If it's going to make money on that, is the original design, is that something that has to stay in place, right? In order for that to continue to draw attraction and interest, right?
Yeah.
How can you mess with the original? That's the thing.
It's extremely hard,
right?
Because it's a brand.
Right.
Like it's and the name itself says it. It has been branded on people's minds. Like the moment you try to remove that, it's either going to leave an ugly scar, or people are just blatantly just not going to remember you anymore.
Correct.
Like
Right.
it's,
Gonna, when I'm going down the aisle, I'm going to reach on the shelf for the for that image.
exactly.
Right?
And you don't even read it anymore.
Exactly.
Like it's just,
It's branded.
it's branded. So you just reach for that.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you,
Yes.
Obviously you think a lot about beauty and aesthetics, but this is your profession, right?
Yes.
And so our viewers, why is it important for us people who are not in the visual arts to think about beauty?
One of the biggest reasons is because, or at least according to Massimo Vignelli, who was an Italian-American architect designer, he would say that because we're surrounded by ugliness, we're surrounded by disease, we're surrounded by violence, we're surrounded by corruption. To search for beauty, it's to try to remedy those aspects of life that make us not enjoy it. As a matter of fact, I have a quote of him that says, "The life of a designer is a life of fight against the ugliness, just like a doctor fights against disease. For us, visual disease is what we have around, and what we try to do is to cure it with design." It's it could be taken a little too far. You like to say that we are, salvaging the world from ugliness, but I think like in each area, in philosophy, in design, I think that's the aim, right? Like it's to improve our lives, to improve the quality of life.
To bring more clarity.
Correct.
Improve.
Mm-hmm.
And a follow up on that, some of us might have a hard time focusing on that which is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Precisely because our lives are so filled with disappointment or trauma, addiction, you name it, right? Corruption, violence, some of the ones you mentioned. How can we learn to appreciate?
Well, I think that we appreciate through understanding that something has worth, that it has value. Like it's that value and that worth obviously depends on you, but for instance, like it's if you a simple thing, like if you go to an application or you go online and you're trying to navigate a pharmacy website to order your medication, and it's layers and layers of bureaucracy and frustration, like, well, that's ugly too. You want to be able to ease the process. That is going to give you time to, enjoy your family, not be pissed off when you leave the pharmacies, like and get into an altercation in traffic because you cannot get this out of your mind, right? Like it's so, I think that would be one of the ways.
Say it again.
That would be one of the ways. To be able to appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, there's two levels of appreciation you just talked about. So there's that one.
The worth.
The worth.
Yeah. But the
value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the other one is, this saving us from the ugliness of the world. Because if we learn to appreciate beautiful things, what we're going to do by default is we're not going to multiply the ugly things, right?
Exactly.
And so.
But we have a tendency of doing it.
We do, right?
Why is that?
It might be the human weakness, right?
I think that it's just. I was talking to a colleague the other day, and we were talking about the pandemic, and then we were talking about the Spanish flu at the beginning of the century, and then right after we had a big war. Like, so it seems like we don't learn from our mistakes, right? We just had a pandemic. Now we are engulfed in these huge two wars,
right,
that are getting the whole world engaged. So it just, like, why? I don't know. I think that we have self-destructive tendencies, perhaps. At the same time, we appreciate beauty and we appreciate order and we appreciate being able to navigate life in an easy way. But it's contradictory, right? Because we also, for the many things that are wrong, I think we know the answer of how to correct those wrongs, but we decide not to.
Why? Do you know? I mean, like, it's a philosophy show, right? And it's like, well, those are complicated questions, but that's our job.
Yeah.
Why do we not say I'm sorry?
I
mean, right?
Yeah.
It would be that easy.
Yeah. Well, like it comes down again to that we were talking about, like worth. Is it worth it? And I would say yes, it is. But when your honor and your dignity, your pride is at stake, then that's when we start to question it. Like, is it worth it? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like, I guess that was one of the questions actually, is if peace is beautiful. Did we put it in there?
Yes.
Right, it is if peace is beautiful, because it seems to me that war, strife, corruption, disappointment, betrayal, they're ugly.
They are.
As opposed to, I guess the humility of saying, you know what, sorry.
Yeah.
And then there's no more drama. But maybe that would be boring. I don't know.
I have an alternative here, because this is a morass, I think.
Yeah, this is the big questions.
Yeah, I mean, how do we avoid war? Is graphic design going to help us out of our tendency to get involved in philosophy? Going to help us out of our tendency to get involved in wars? And it seems to me that, and maybe you can comment on this, but it seems to me is that one of the, as educators, because all three of us are educators, right? One of the educators' goals or motivations should be to help our students learn how to appreciate and to create beautiful things.
Yeah.
Right? Because in that case, if we fill the world with beautiful things, we're going to be, fighting that other kind of a battle where we devolve into the ugliness of strife and revenge and anger and destruction, right? So it seems like there's all, to come back to Kant at the beginning here, from the beginning, it almost seems like there's an ethical imperative to it, for us to do that kind of a work. Do the kind of work where we design things such that we cultivate a sense for appreciating beautiful things or novel things or things that strike our thinking patterns in good ways, right? Invigorating ways, right?
Yeah. At the same time, I mean, something beautiful. Going back, let's say, to technology, like it's just a week ago, they were talking about how there was this article that came out in public radio. They have proof, apparently, which I don't doubt, that the way Meta has designed, for instance, like Instagram, it's extremely addictive to teenagers. It's addictive to everyone, but obviously, as adults, we have so many things that we have to be taking care of that we don't have time to be sitting on Instagram all day, right? Like it's so we are kind of like permeated from that a little bit, but young people are not. Like, so it's supposed to be something fun. It's supposed to be something beautiful. It's supposed to be something that is going to be creating herds and of like people coming together. Yet, it's in many occasions it's doing exactly the opposite, right? It's isolating. It's creating these stigmas on our youth, and I tell you, for like I have a teenager at home. It's like, and I see how certain things that he sees there affect them in a way that doesn't affect me. And as much as I try to convince him, listen, I mean, like, this is artificial. It's not real. Like, it's for them it is. because that's the narrative that they engage on an everyday basis at school, and they spend more time there than with us. Like it's so yeah, like something that conceptually it's beautiful, but it can have negative repercussions. And I think like that the same thing applies to pretty much everything that we do. Like if we do, let's say at least in commerce, if we do something that is beautiful, obviously the aim is to attract someone to pick it up and purchase it. But many times it could be harmful. And then there's this idea like, well, as visual designers that are involved with commerce, are we ethically correct by be doing that? And it's like, and man, it gets complicated. Like that's one of the reasons why I only once, and I'm not even going to mention the name, only once I have gotten involved in doing graphics for a political candidate. Because like what happens if this person ends up doing something that I completely disagree with, and in a way I help them to get there, or her, like it's then it's going to make me feel like, well, I helped in this situation that is not the best for our constituents, right? Like it's so, but
this opens
it's
up
complicated.
So many cans of worms, though, Antonio. Because you're not doing your work. You're not doing your kind of designing in the sense of art for art's sake, right? I mean, there's definitely, you have a client that you're working for, right, and things like that. And so similarly, if you're working for the business world, what's the difference between doing that and working for the political world, right?
But even as educators, I mean, we don't know if one of our students will end up being
exactly
right. And here we are, just like really trying to believe in this person, right? And we don't know what they may. Hopefully, they'll grow up to be wonderful people. That's our hope, right?
But that's unavoidable. I mean, we're going to have.
This isn't part of our questions, but I was wondering what you think about mistakes.
Within the creative process, or
sure, or even personal mistakes in the narrative of our lives, right? It's like I love, what was the name of the guy who painted trees, and he would say, and if you make a mistake, that's okay.
Oh
he
yeah,
would just, go back and paint it, right?
Public brought PBS,
right?
What is your take on mistakes? Because it's hard to appreciate them sometimes.
I feel that it's the only way to learn. Like it's the more mistakes you make with a good intent, right? Like it's, you're really trying, or you're aiming to do the best possible work that you can. But in order for you to get there, how do you know that? Well, obviously by making mistakes. And I think like the same thing applies to life, right? Like it's that's how we learn. Because we don't want to place ourselves in that situation that was so painful, or so, like maybe you did something that caused you ridicule. Like you don't want to be there. Like it's so that's how you learn, right? Making mistakes, and we try to gain as close as we can get to perfection, but. So we try and try and try and try, and all of those tries, for the most part, at least for me, when I'm working on something, they translate into failure. But it's only until I truly understand what is it that I am facing, and I learn to dominate it, then I finally feel, okay, now it's working. But I had no idea what I was doing, in a way. It's, I think that it was Hemingway, the one that said that creativity was this beast that you would have to wrestle until you were able to tame it, right? Like it's, and once you tame it, then you can perhaps call something that is finished, although like nothing is truly finished.
That sounds like Hemingway would say that.
Well, in terms of this, these are interesting questions, because I've been reading and teaching Nietzsche lately, and have been actually for quite some time. Just past couple of years, I've actually been wrestling with Nietzsche. I used his philosophy for a work I was doing on architecture, and but he talks about failure too, and why, what role failure has in the creative process. And while you were talking, I was thinking about what it means to create something, and we have to overcome our failures in order to be able to master the rules and the process that it takes to get to the level to be able to create anything at all anyway, right? Because otherwise I'm just copying.
Exactly.
Right? So if I'm going to create something, I've got to actually deal with a lot of failure, because to get to that level of mastery, of perfect mastery, right? Where I can break the rules and know about it and know it.
Exactly.
There's the new image. There's the new, the new thing, right? So failure does play a huge role, and the ability to kind of incorporate that into my whole learning process seems like it's super important.
It is.
What advice do you have for students and our viewers to fail liberally, right? To keep on failing, because some failures, as we were speaking earlier, are hard for us to get back up in the game, right?
In the comment section for our show, this is going to be identified as the failure episode.
No, we do have a colleague who wrote a book on failure, and it has become a bestseller, evidently.
Yeah, I mean, what do you tell your students about their failures,
fail.
right?
For what it's worth, I tell my students, you want to make as many mistakes before the quiz, so that you don't make them on the quiz. But in life, some of these failures are their cost is cost us dear things, right?
Yeah.
And so how can we widen our perspective when we are so consumed by that failure to remember the big picture of this is just one mistake in
many,
right, in in the scope of my life.
I would say that to make things a little simpler, I think that if you enjoy what you do,
nice,
it's then making or having those failures, it's obviously going to help you to appreciate that final result. So enjoy the failures, enjoy the problems. It's now, I mean, I'm simplifying it, because I am talking about if we are talking about doing a successful design or a successful painting or a successful whatever it is creatively that we're talking about. Well, I think failure is required for you to get there. So enjoy it. Enjoy those failures. When it comes down to life, it's a different thing, right? Obviously, the arts and pretty much anything that we do is a reflection of life. Or at least we want to think of it that way. But life mistakes, you're right. I mean, that can set you back.
If a doctor amputates the wrong arm.
Exactly. Or you don't consecutively in 2 years pay taxes, right? That's going to come back and hurt you, right? But at the same time, it's something that that I think you were aware that you were doing wrong. You just didn't want to think about it. When you are creating something, you want to make sure that the end result is as best of a product that it can be, right? Like but again, I mean, in order to get there, well, you need to make mistakes. Like the first thing that when I am working on something or I am helping a student, for some reason, like the first ideas that we always have, there are these huge cliches. Like it's obvious stuff. Well, I consider those kind of like mistakes. But the more you know about the problem at hand, the more you feel comfortable with that particular task. You get to solve it and call it a success at the end. And then you see it hindsight, and then you go like, oh man, that wasn't really that great, right? Even though you thought that it was fantastic at the moment, right? Like it's, I guess that's enjoy those mistakes.
I like that comment. I like to work with joy myself, but I hope I don't put you on this spot by asking you this, but so in the many projects you've done, Antonio, can you think of one or maybe more that you weren't happy about? That didn't turn out like you thought it would, and you had to let it go. But
I can think of one. I was working on a book cover, and this was talking about mistakes. This was my mistake, and I think that it was also the mistake of the editor. Mm. We never really came to an agreement of what is it that they wanted. Mm. They only gave. I'm sorry.
The author?
Not the author. The author was actually just letting us do whatever we wanted. Mm. So it was the editor. And she was never really clear. So I think that was a mistake. Mm-hmm. And I think my mistake was not clarifying things. So I just kept on working and working and working to the time that I obviously knew that I was losing money already, because I was spending endless hours on this thing. So it came to a point when I said, okay, listen, I mean, we're not getting anywhere. Just tell me, what is it that you were looking for? And then she goes like, well, I was thinking about this. And it's like, and why didn't you tell me that from the beginning? Because I would have just, we would have avoided all of this, unpleasant conversations, because sometimes the arguments would get a little heated because I was not able to cut through, and she was not being able to cut through either. So we were just like working aimlessly. So once she told me what she had in mind, the solution took a couple of days, and that was the cover of the book, and we were all happy. I was happy with the result,
but not happy with how you got there.
But not happy with how I got there, and then to make things worse, a couple of years passed, and we were in a book event where all of the books were being on display. And then she comes up to me and she taps on my shoulder and says, you know what? Your initial idea was the right one. And I said like, okay. So it does happen. Yeah. It does happen. And then you don't try to think too much about those.
I would like to speak, I would like for us to think about that a little, because earlier you mentioned one of the criteria was, does it serve the purpose, right? And then you also picked up the phone and you said, aesthetically, it fits in my hand, it fits in my pocket, in my jacket, right? Or it feels good and it works. And so then this ties ethics and utility, because one of our questions to you is what is useful or efficient, beautiful?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it, at least in our area, it has to be useful. It has to work. It has to serve a purpose. If you are, and that's a huge conversation that we have. We are within the Department of Art. It's sometimes like if you think of other universities, sometimes the graphic design area is in business or is in marketing, but we are in communications, but we are within the Department of Art. And that's something that I love about our program, because there was no such a thing as graphic design back in the 20s. It was lithography. It was only until the Bauhaus that they started to really bring together these ideas.
Tell us
of
more about the Bauhaus, just so that that we're all on the same page.
Well, the Bauhaus was a school in Germany. That was closed 3 times, because of how radically they were thinking. But their whole thing was that whatever was being produced, it had to have a utility to it. It could not be arts for art's sake. That was the case in many cases, like with Art Nouveau, for instance. Actually, their philosophy was that art had to be beautiful just because it had to be beautiful. Interestingly enough, obviously, it was used on a wall coverings, and it was used on upholstery. So it served a purpose at the end.
In France,
right?
It's great. All right.
But anyway,
here's where the ethics comes in.
Yes.
Useful for who and for what, right?
Well, useful for whomever sees worth in that particular object, in that particular book. For instance, since I was talking about books, let's say you have an itch that you wanna read a certain type of novel or certain type of book, and you want to find a new author, and you go to the bookstore, which obviously that's ceasing to be. I remember going to the bookstore and just spending endless hours there, and then I would jump to the music section. But still, when you go and you're searching through the stacks of books, you a cover that it's going to speak to you and is going to resonate with you. Perhaps it's going to help you in making that decision of purchasing this book versus that. But obviously, you had an idea in mind of what is it that you wanted to read next. You had an idea in mind of what next band you wanted to get familiarized with.
Let me tell you what I'm thinking about. My perverse mind. So some years ago, I was in Guanajuato, and I signed up for a tour. Little did I know that they were going to take me to a torture museum. Have you been to it? Have you been to the torture museum in Guanajuato?
I think so, yeah. I didn't go in, but my kids did.
Yeah. So there was that, and I haven't been in Germany, but I have been to Germany, but I haven't been to...
Rotenburg am Tauber has a torture museum too.
Okay.
I've been to that one.
Okay.
So
mostly things for women, by the way.
So we represent here the Spanish Inquisition and Nazi Germany here, and
Jeez.
I just was blown away with the human creativity
to kill.
Yeah.
And to torture.
Yeah, to cause pain.
Yeah. How there is the human creativity, no doubt, right? And the efficiency of these devices, right?
Yeah.
To get the truth out of people or kill hundreds of people. And so, there's some ways in which efficiency is beautiful. I like things to work and make my life easier.
Yeah.
But then there is this efficiency gone wrong,
But this is related to what Antonio said earlier about his resistance to work with political figures, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I'm already jumping ahead to your response.
No. I think so.
Just tell us what are your thoughts about there? How can we? We're educating, we're teaching a craft, a skill, but we're trying to foster creativity. How can we guide that creativity, right, in ways that towards beauty and helpfulness and service, towards the ethical causes, right? Not just towards efficiency for the sake of efficiency, or I don't know.
Well,
What are your thoughts on
in
that?
philosophy, we make distinctions between the beautiful, the good, and the true, right? So those kinds of things. And here, I think what Kim is getting at is that we can design things beautifully for like really bad reasons. For like,
For bad.
Or, you know, for instance, I went to Memphis to attend the opening exhibition of a colleague of mine. Probably you're familiar with her, Rachel Thieves. She was the director of the metals program in my department, which is basically, it's sculpture, but it's jewelry design. Her work is not of such nature that it's comfortable to wear. But her aim is to show a beautiful object, but also to make whomever is wearing this piece of jewelry aware of their body and how their body moves. So in some occasions it could be actually.
I'm thinking like a hair shirt.
No, I mean, for instance, she had one beautiful piece that was it was a chain that dropped all the way to the floor. Like, so in order for her to move, or whomever was wearing this to move, they would actually have to carry it to move around. So, and at the beginning it was uncomfortable, but then their body right away learned how to move around this object to cause the least amount of pain or discomfort. You know, like, so
that's fascinating.
Yeah, and pretty much everything that she does is of such nature. Like, for instance, I mean, she does these beautiful neck pieces that are stiff. I mean, they're metal and they rest on your shoulders. You know, like, it's not something like a regular chain that is going to form around your anatomy. This thing actually sits and makes you uncomfortable. You're like, so the whole concept behind this is that she wants you to be aware of that piece that you are wearing. Don't take it for granted, you know, because she actually spent a lot of time and effort doing this beautiful piece. If you're going to be wearing one of my pieces, learn how to wear it. You know, like, it's I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, it made me think. It made me think about the Sundance ceremony, or the ceremonies of the Sundance. Right, same thing. You know, not jewelry, but piercing and painful.
High heels.
High heels. Yeah, thank you. Right, piercings in general. Right.
Tattoos.
Right.
High heels as weapons.
Yes. Well.
Exactly.
Going back to the Sundance ceremonies, there's a sense of service and a sense of sacrifice that is beautiful, as opposed to maybe not sacrifice, but a sense of service. And the border, but see, that's it, right? That's what I'm saying. I guess for the Grand Inquisitor, this must have been beautiful, you know?
You know, interestingly enough, like, I mean, at the
From
beginning,
their perspective. Go ahead.
I know. I mean, at the beginning when we were talking about what is beautiful, like, it's one of the things that interests me the most in beauty is perhaps ugly beauty when it comes down to my personal work. Like, when you think about, or when I think about the artists that I follow, like Robert Rauschenberg, Anthony Tapies, Anselm Kiefer. If you look at their work, none of it would be the typical beautiful artwork that most people could relate to, let's say, Sunflowers by Van Gogh, or like, it's because it's a beautiful scenery, right? Like, it's so most people could perhaps agree, okay, it's a beautiful thing because it's flowers. But when you look at the work of these artists that I'm mentioning, it's almost like jazz right? It's when jazz, it's following a rhythm, and then all of a sudden it becomes syncopated, and it just goes off, right? Like that offness, it makes it human,
dissonance.
makes it, it breaks that simple beauty, and then that ugly beauty comes in handy. Like it's the Andaluces in Spain, they have this thing that they call duende. Like it's something might be beautiful, but if it doesn't have duende, like which is that spirit that is going to make something really make you feel. That's when the equation comes together more beautifully, in my opinion, or the way that I appreciate art. And the way I take some of this, like for instance, I was working on a project with Benjamin Ali Designs. We had always worked on books. I designed several of his books, but we always wanted to work on a piece that was outside of the publishing world. And we didn't really know what that project was going to be. So he did a book that is called The Book of What Remains. It's a poetry book. So every chapter would have a meditation on living in the desert. It was 18 meditations. And those meditations, they range from being humorous. They started to get a little bit more serious and political and personal as they progress to number 18. So one day he tells me, you know what, why don't you take those 18 meditations and just do whatever you want with them? So it was like this dream project, right? Because I didn't have someone that was either going to be rejecting or accepting whatever I did. Because that was one of the things that I told him from the beginning. Don't expect me to be an illustrator of your thoughts. I want to be able to react to your thinking and create my own graphic meditations. I went around trying to find a metaphor or a symbol that would represent, because it wasn't just living on the desert, it's living on this desert, living on the Chihuahua desert and living on the border. So I went around trying to find an image that was going to serve me as a background for each one of these meditations. So one thing that I had always been mesmerized with, it's like utility boxes around the city. They are used and abused. They get painted all kinds of colors, and then their stickers, they are supposed to be ignored. They actually, that's the reason why they paint them using colors that are not going to be loud, because they are meant to just, you pass by and you don't see them. But I happen to always see them. And I really enjoy the textures that they had. I thought that's an interesting image. So I went around the city and photographing. I photographed about 300 different utility boxes and these color walls along the freeway. I don't know if you've noticed, sometimes the city or the state, I don't know who does, but they go and paint these squares.
I've noticed.
And they're layered on top of each other, and then they never do anything with them. They just leave them like that. And they're quite beautiful. And this was not done by an artist. This was done just by a city worker, right? So I went and then photographed those things as textures, right? And I thought that it was the perfect symbol for our border, because we cannot compare ourselves to, let's say, the lusciousness of Dallas or Austin and how green it is, or if you go up to Pennsylvania and stuff. Our beauty is barren. It's not the typical beauty that everyone understands as beauty per se. It's
desert beauty.
It's desert beauty. So I took those images and used them as backgrounds, and within context with the words and with the other images that I was mixing them with, they were the perfect background and the perfect metaphor for our region. So that ugly beauty came in extremely handy in what I was doing.
All those plants with the pointy edges.
Oh man, it's like,
Right.
See, I mean, but that, I mean, because it's nature, you know, like it's, right now I'm actually working on a piece where I'm looking at an ocotillo, you know, like it's, and when you pay attention to that branch, each one of those thorns, it doesn't just like pop. It actually has a trace. It's almost like a hand that goes like that, each thorn, and it starts forming the whole thing. It's quite a beautiful thing, you know, when you see it as a piece of design. You know, at a glance, it's just this thorny looking thing. It's threatening, right? Like it's a
Dry branch full
exactly.
of thorns.
You know, and that's kind of like how I see that perhaps many times the rest of the country sees us as this thing that it's there. It's the back door of the country. You know, like it's in a way supposed to be ignored, but it's not ignored. Right? I mean, we have a huge influence, especially now. So to me, that was kind of like a great way of bringing this concept into these meditations.
We didn't get to ask you. We must close.
Okay.
But we didn't get to ask you some awesome questions that I thought our questions were great, were aesthetic and beautiful. But
I think what we did was just fantastic. It was a wonderful
in
dialogue.
a way you did.
It was great. Thank you.
In a way you did answer, because one of our questions that I didn't get to ask was, how is art healing? And in a way you did answer, you know, by looking at the ugly as beautiful, but not in that simplicity, right? You went into detail. So thank you for joining us.
Great.
Professor
It was
Castro.
fantastic to talk to
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very much, Antonio.
Great.
It's good to
So-
get to know your work.
This
Absolutely.
has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera. Kim Diaz,
Jules Simon.
Professor Castro. Please join us next time.